My name is Brian Haney, as I mentioned before. Kat and I are both accommodation specialists at the Accessibility Resource Center at UNM main campus, and we're here today to talk to you a little bit about who we are, the work that we do, and some of the philosophy undergirding that work. Oh, is that going to work? There we go. Okay, so this is our ARC team here, as well as our contact information if anybody wants to take a screenshot of that. As you can see, I'll use my cursor here. We've got our littlest employee down here as well, who just turned one. All right, and ARC's mission. ARC recognizes that individuals with disabilities are an integral part of a diverse community, and we're committed to the provision of comprehensive resources for the university community to create equitable, inclusive, and practical learning environments. And putting that more simply, we approve reasonable academic and housing accommodations here at UNM for eligible students with disabilities. So this chart is a very recent one with the 2023-2024 academic year. Just wanted to point out here how the numbers of students enrolling in disability resource centers across UNM, because these numbers include main campus as well as branch campuses, have been going up and up. You can see there's a dip during the pandemic when enrollment dropped across the board. But since that time, we've been enrolling more and more students. So this is becoming, a larger section of the UNM population that we're serving. I think, if I'm remembering the numbers correctly, at one point a few years ago, it was somewhere below 5% of the total student population that we worked with. Now we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 6%. So that's going up and up. So Kat's going to tell us a little bit about law and policy now.
So first, Americans with Disability Act. This provides civil right protections to individuals with disabilities. It prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, and it ensures that people with disabilities have the same rights and opportunities as people without disabilities. In connection with ADA, UNM also has policy 2310. This is a commitment to equal opportunities and reasonable accommodations. Essentially, it asks that members of our academic community must engage in an interactive discussion of reasonable accommodations. So interacting with someone, going over what is reasonable and appropriate, problem solve issues and concerns, all while maintaining academic standards. So what is a disability? This is a physical or cognitive challenge which substantially limits major life activities. These include walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, reading, learning, concentrating, communicating, and a couple of other things as well. So there are both visible and invisible disabilities. Of the students with disabilities, the majority have an invisible disability. So this is a disability you can't see. You might not know or even assume that someone has this. These are things like learning disabilities, ADHD, psychological diagnoses, and the social stigma around having a disability can be really painful to talk about, and it can be really painful to talk about having a disability for a lot of students. And so many students with disabilities choose not to disclose or ask for accommodations. And we always like to keep in mind that assumptions hurt. Every person is entitled to respect dignity and privacy when it comes to disclosing their disability or choosing not to.
Okay, so unfortunately, as with any civil rights protection, the reason for it is because those individuals face discrimination, and individuals with disabilities who encounter discrimination, we refer to that as ableism. There are a few things to point out about that it's rooted in the assumption that people with disabilities need fixing, that like any other form of discrimination, structural and systemic barriers that exist within our our university, our world, et cetera, maintain its existence. And here at UNM, if individuals encounter cases of discrimination, they can contact the Office of Compliance, Equity, and Equal Opportunity, or CEEO. So just a few examples of ableism. One is just simply ignoring that someone has a disability, that they're having trouble doing something, which, is just jerky behavior. So please don't do that. Assuming disability is the only factor in a person's experience, um, expecting that disabled people will not be interested or capable in participating in what may be going on, assuming that all technologies are accessible to everyone. That's a pretty big one that we encounter here at ARC, and ignoring social justice issues that primarily affect people with disabilities. So there are a bunch of different ways of looking at disability. That ableist view that I was talking about may be seeing people with disabilities as being less than others. Um, Disability can also be looked at through a medical lens, which oftentimes thinks about disability as being something that can be cured, or that needs to be cured. A social justice perspective refocuses our thoughts about disability as being just one aspect of the human condition. That shifts the focus towards the barriers that that particular individual may be encountering. ARC is, if you didn't get it from the way that I was presenting it, committed to social justice. Just a few points about that. Um, Students with disabilities have the right to full participation. This is a given in the work that we do. An individual's dignity and experience is prioritized through social justice. That social justice perspective. UNM has this line that each of us defines all of us, which is wonderful for the work that we do, because that really does center our focus on valuing every member of our academic community. And therefore, that responsibility to dismantle those systemic and structural barriers becomes a campus-wide responsibility for all of us. So speaking of barriers, what a barrier might be in determining accommodations. Those barriers could include things like a physical environment that's not accessible. It could include something like a lack of assistive technology to aid that individual. It could also be services, systems, or policies that hinder the involvement of everyone on campus. Trying to remember, Kat, is this you or me? No,
This
this
one's
is
you.
still
Yeah.
me, still me.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Um, so this old chestnut here, I'm sure you have encountered before, but this is a really great illustration of what individuals' experiences might be without accommodations, with accommodations, and then without the need for accommodations. So without any accommodations, this first part of the graphic here, people are excluded. This middle part of the illustration is about accommodations, right? Reshuffling around those resources so that everyone is allowed to participate. And this final illustration here is akin to what's referred to as universal design, where barriers to participation are anticipated before participation even happens, and are dismantled entirely so that everyone is able to participate frictionlessly, I suppose. So in talking about accessibility, it's worth talking about who benefits from it. Um, and a great illustration of that is what they refer to as the curb cut effect. So the curb cuts, if you're not familiar, are the cuts in the sidewalk that allow accessibility to those sidewalks. So those sidewalks may be designed to benefit people in, say, wheelchairs, but that leads to benefits for other people who have mobility challenges that maybe were not anticipated when the sidewalk was designed, which then leads to other benefits for people with strollers, bicycles, although you shouldn't be bicycling on the sidewalk, everyone. But if you need to push your bicycle up onto the sidewalk, it does make it much easier. And so at any rate, this curb cut effect, leads to more inclusive participation across the board, even for people who don't have disabilities. I think another great illustration of this is the use of captioning, which I know that many of us use, many of us are probably using in this conversation right now, which benefits people who are maybe working in a loud environment and they're still able to participate in something because they can access those captions even if they're not hard of hearing.
This one's mine. So this is what to do if you suspect a student might, might have a disability. So the first one kind of goes back to something we said about students maybe not wanting to disclose, and that everyone has the right to privacy. So assumptions can hurt. You don't want to presume, and you especially don't want to directly ask someone if they have a disability. Let them come to you, let them disclose to you on their own, like let them decide. If a student does disclose their disability or believes that they may have one, this is when the Accessibility Resource Center says to refer them to us. So that's when we would ask you to send them over, let them know where we're located, give them our contact information, all of that. If a disability isn't disclosed in that conversation with the student, you can include ARC as one of a resource on campus, along with other things like CAPS, which is tutoring, El Centro, ARC, career services. We have a Ribbons resource, LGBTQ+. There's a lot of different resources you can refer those students to on campus. Once we start interacting with the student, we engage in an interactive process. This is a work of removing barriers to access without fundamentally altering a course, the degree program, or any of those requirements. And it requires a lot of collaboration. So the first part is that it is student initiated. This means the student provides us or ARC with documentation of a disability signed by a licensed professional. We need to make sure we have the disability on there as well as that signature by the professional. Next, we set up what we call a welcome meeting. The student meets with someone like Brian and I, and we have a conversation. We talk about their documentation. We talk about barriers they've experienced in the classroom, kind of let them share with us what they're going through and work together. Which leads us to 3, the accommodation plan. We develop this together and we come up with accommodations that are going to address those barriers that the student has identified in our welcome meeting in that initial discussion. 4, lastly, an accommodation letter is created. We have a whole system that does this, but these letters list the accommodations and they're sent out to the students' instructors via email and lets them know what should be utilized in the classroom. So how does ARC determine an accommodation plan? So first we ask, is it reasonable? Does it address a barrier? Is it going to address that barrier? Can it be done? Then we look at, is it appropriate? So we have that documentation from the student. We look to see, does this align with what we're seeing in the documentation? And lastly, is it effective? Is this going to diminish or eliminate that barrier? We don't want to provide things that aren't going to be effective or helpful to the student.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the types of accommodations that we provide to students, services that we provide to them. These accommodations are kind of organized by category. So the first one is accommodations that provide access to the classroom. So that might include things like assigned seating, attendance adjustments or deadline extensions, additional time between classes for students maybe with mobility issues, alternative furniture sometimes, allowance to leave class and return, to deal with symptoms, medications, that sort of thing. We get questions all the time from faculty, as you can imagine, about things like attendance adjustments and deadline extensions. Just wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about how we implement those. So these are accommodations that are used when a student's disability is of an episodic nature. Um, those symptoms could occur unexpectedly and cause those students to miss class or turn in assignments late. So uh, we 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 work with students in entering into an interactive dialogue with their faculty members to establish parameters around how those particular accommodations might work. Because as you can imagine, from class to class, attendance and deadlines can work in wildly different ways. Sometimes attendance isn't even taken. Sometimes it counts for a significant portion of the grade. Sometimes deadlines are already pretty flexible in their nature. Other times it's 11:59 or nothing, right? So as far as attendance is concerned, we consider a reasonable attendance adjustment to be an increase of 50 to 100% of allowed absences when compared to what's stated in the attendance policy in the syllabus. Deadline extensions, similarly, they don't extend every deadline. Students and faculty make an arrangement about how much time the student is going to have if they request an extension, and then they have to notify faculty members about a particular assignment that they're requesting an extension on, and then they would get the agreed upon amount of time in which to complete it.
So then we're going to look at access to notes, so access to those in-class notes. There are different note-taking tools. One really cool one is a smart pen. I'm always really fascinated by how those work. Recording with some other device like a phone or a computer. Having access to lectured slides in advance. Using a laptop or tablet to take notes, and also speech-to-text apps. So some notes about recording. Recording lectures help students retain information and generate notes that are comprehensive and complete. This accommodation is protected by federal law. The accommodation to audio record classes is specifically cited in the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And the Office for Civil Rights has ruled that colleges cannot require a student obtain permission from faculty or classmates to use as an approved accommodation. So students do not need to have signed consent from people in the classroom. They have the right to record. On top of that, New Mexico is a one-party consent state. This means that conversations can be recorded as long as one of the parties involved consents to that recording, and this includes the person doing it. So given available technology, students without disabilities can and do often record their classes as well.
And Kat, it's worth mentioning to everyone that over the last academic year, we had an unprecedented number of faculty contacts about recording in particular. So it's been something that faculty members have been concerned about. And so we had to develop language around that in order to answer the many questions that we got over the last academic year.
So questions about lecture slides in advance. So this is when students are provided the lectures before they enter the classroom or that space. Students require this accommodation because a disability significantly impacts how they process verbal or written information. And being able to preview those lecture slides can enable the students to do a lot of things. This includes more effectively shift attention between listening to the lecture, looking at the slides, and taking their notes. It gives them cues about the most important things being discussed. It gives them a framework to organize key takeaways in advance for better note-taking, and it primes themselves to assimilate new information into their existing funds of knowledge. More time is better in general, so even getting the slides 5 minutes before class will allow a student to import those slides to things like OneNote or any other note-taking app that they might use. We also look at getting students access to texts. Examples of technologies that enable students to read texts and other classroom materials include alternative text formats. This can be converting a physical book into a digital book, brailing books to allow people with low vision or blind people to access them, or other forms of alternative texts. There's a software, Read and Write software. This is on ARC's website. This is a text-to-speech software. Texts that are posted on Canvas also have accessibility features, including text-to-speech. And then students might also use magnification devices to allow the text to be bigger, make it a little easier for them to read and understand. We also have access to exams. Processing speeds, anxiety, other disability-related symptoms can require additional time for testing. Students can't always, with disabilities, can't always complete a test in the time they are given. If they have this accommodation of some additional times, students schedule and take them their test at the ARC Testing Center. ARC's Testing Center assists professors with extending students' online exams as well. And all exams administered in our testing center takes place under the same conditions as they would in the classroom, just with that additional time added on. We also offer deaf and hard of hearing services, DHHS. For this, if someone needs to request interpretive services, those must be made 1 week prior to the event or activity that you're requesting them for. And you would just email those requests to dhhs@unm.edu. ARC schedules sign language interpreters for students and faculty, community members for classes, meetings, and other university activities. DHS also provides FM systems for audio amplification for classrooms, closed captioning services for videos, and live captioning services as well.
Okay, so the work that we do at ARC is focused entirely on creating a more inclusive campus. And just a few points about that we wanted to make. So ARC accommodations are initiated by students with disabilities who are seeking assistance and support. The interactive process that we use with each student seeks to address barriers that they actually face in their education. Our goal is always creating equitable learning environments and continuing that inclusive approach to participation is how the university moves closer and closer towards becoming the more inclusive place that we hope it will be. Right. So any questions? And there's our contact information if you need it as well.